All right. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Ashley Miles. I'm an MBA graduate of the class of 2017. And my co-hosts for today are Kirsten Nelson Johnson Byron, and Madhu Yalamarthi, Annie Riley, and our fearless leader of the GSB Alumni Affairs Office, Kara Hanlon. So we are hosting this event called Become a Better Diversity and Inclusion Advocate, and this is being put on by the Stanford GSB Recent Alumni Ambassadors Program. So just a little bit about the Recent Alumni Ambassadors Program. We are a group that represents the classes of 2014 through 2020, and we put on programming that is generally meant to appeal to the younger recent graduates of Stanford GSB, but given the pandemic and quarantining, we're able to do events that are beyond the borders of our Bay Area base and also that appeal to a broader group of people. So thank you for joining us wherever you are today, and we look forward to jumping in. I'm excited to introduce our two panelists for today. So the first is Tiana Conley, and Tiana serves as the Vice President of Global Cereal for the Kellogg Company, where she's responsible for a $6 million flagship portfolio that includes powerhouse brands like Special K, Frosted Flakes, and Fruit Loops. Prior to joining Kellogg, she was the marketing director of global tequila at Beam Suntory, where she led a portfolio of 5 brands and oversaw their operations in Tequila, Mexico. Ms. Conley held a variety of marketing roles at Kimberly-Clark, Procter & Gamble, including leading their $4 billion global bath tissue portfolio, as well as leading the P&L for the North American Olay brand. She received a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and an MBA from Xavier University Williams College of Business. Tiana is based in Chicago and is the mother of 2 children. And our next panelist is Chaka Booker. So Chaka is the managing director of the Brood Center, a national nonprofit founded by billionaire philanthropist Eli Broad. He is also the author of 2 books, Mastering the Hire, 12 Strategies to Improve Your Odds of Finding the Best Hire, and The Empowered Candidate, the Power You Have to Land the Job You Deserve. Previously, Chaka served as Senior Director of Recruitment and Selection for the Brood Residency. I think I'm saying that incorrectly. Prior to that, Chaka worked in the public sector, first as the founder and director of A+ Services, a tutorial company operating within the Los Angeles Unified School District, and then as Director of Education for Star Inc., a provider of after-school enrichment and supplemental education services. He holds a bachelor's degree in economics and psychology from UCLA and an MBA from Stanford Graduate School of Business. So thank you for joining us, our awesome co-host. First of all, I just want to kick off and say, how are you doing today? Tell us a little bit about where you're calling in from. Tiana, do you want to start?
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I think I might literally be the only person on this entire call that did not go to Stanford. So please try not to hold it against me, but I'm doing really well today. Every day I think is a little bit of a roller coaster in the year that's called 2020. But today seems to be a pretty good day, and it's nice to be here with you.
That's great. Also state that Chaka is joining us. He's like worked a miracle to join us today. The power is out in his home in LA, and so he's joining from a hot spot in the backyard, trying to make it work. So I'm assuming you're going to be on very quickly or back on very soon. So we'll jump to you as soon as we see you on. So to kick off with the first question, besides being the right thing to do, can you tell us why diversity, equity, and inclusion is so important?
Sure. So it's really interesting and frankly slightly bizarre to me that we're still requiring a business case for diversity and inclusion in the year 2020. If I'm just being perfectly honest, I feel like the moral argument should probably be enough at this case or at this point, but it simply isn't in a lot of organizations, and I know that's the reality that a lot of people are living. The bottom line, if you're thinking about the business case, is that embracing diversity and inclusion makes you more money. And you don't have to believe me. There's definitive and empirical evidence. You can look at the McKinsey study that was published that shows the top quartile firms have 35% stronger financial performance. And I think that's a hell of a motivator to get behind it, whether that's your moral position or not. Whether you work for a for-profit or non-for-profit, that should be a strong motivation to get behind it. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense, okay? Because diverse employees serve diverse consumers, and diversity is a fact, okay? If you look at the world, if you look at the country, the world is largely Black and brown. The country is becoming more Black and brown. If you look at children under 12, it's the first generation of children that's more than 50% non-white. And so essentially, if you don't have a plan to win with Black and brown consumers on your business, you don't have a plan to win. And so you really, it's in your best interest to get behind and embrace diversity and inclusion. And if you start by doing that from an employee standpoint, that really enables you to have the tools to carry that through to the consumer proposition.
Yes, that is so important. I loved your line, if you don't have the tools to reach Black and brown folks, you don't have the tools to win. Exactly. So how can we proactively work to attract a diverse group of candidates to our companies in the first place, particularly as we're trying to build out the overall diversity of our existing teams?
I'll just pause in case Chaka's back on the line.
We're on the lookout for him, so
okay.
I don't think he's not quite yet. I'm scrolling.
I'll keep rolling, and if he pops in at any point, he can add to it. I think a lot of, so I've cycled through a number of companies at this point, but I also compare notes with a lot of colleagues across a lot of different industries, a lot of different functions, and a lot of different businesses. And I would kind of summarize that if you do what you always do, you're going to get what you always get. And that's a whole lot of lack of diversity. I feel like where I feel that people tend to lean on are kind of common tropes, like we can't find the qualified Black and brown talent. And my position is that we do not have a supply problem when it comes to Black and brown talent. We have a demand issue. Because when I'm searching for the talent, I have zero issues finding it. And so it's really like, do you want the talent or do you not want the talent? Are you committed to finding the talent? Are you committed to bringing in the talent or not? So it's really more, in my view, are you committed or are you not committed? So I think, Nat, if you want to achieve a different outcome, I think you have to be intentional about expanding your table. That means looking for talent in different places, from different universities, from different organizations, from different companies, from considering or seeking referrals from different employees, and not going to that same handful of folks that you typically look for. You've got to be intentional.
That is so important, that intentionality. It looks like we have Chaka back. So Chaka, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much. We know you're dealing with a power outage, and we're so grateful that you're powering through, literally and figuratively, to be here with us today.
That's absolutely glad to be here. And yeah, not only a power outage, but 3 kids at home from working from home in school. So lots of things going on at the game this morning, and then the power goes out. So happy to be here and happy to answer any, happy to continue the discussion.
Yeah, so the question at hand right now is, how can we proactively work to attract a diverse group of candidates to our companies, especially building out the diversity of existing teams?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo everything that Tiana said. I mean, I had very similar things top of mind. Odds are that your organization and your current networks are already doing a great job of attracting whatever the dominant group is in your organization, right? So if your organization has, you know, more white males or more engineers or fill in the blank, whatever it is, you're doing a great job there. So you got to somewhere else. You got to figure out where is the pool of people, and you have to overweight that. You have to intentionally say, okay, we're not going to go to the usual places, not even go to new places, just don't even go to the usual anymore. You have to completely cut off that stream, because odds are you're still going to get that pool of people into your network, because that's what's naturally happening. These networks happen naturally. So in order to go against that, you have to almost say, okay, we're not going to post where we usually post. We're going to actually cut that off. Not even do that anymore. Only going to post where we are looking for the type of diversity we need. And then diversity broadly here, obviously race and gender, sexual orientation are things that are top of mind. But you fill in the blanket what diversity means to you, and then go find the places where that lives. So if it's NBA's, National Black MBA Association, or if it's Engineer Society of Professional Engineers, look for colleges that are Hispanic serving, if that's the population you're looking for. Arizona State University, Florida International University. If possible, recruit from Puerto Rico. Those are US citizens as well. You have to really figure out where are the folks that you're looking to break outside that box. Tiana mentioned look outside your sector. I know in tech, it's a circle.
I think we might have lost your audio, at least did for me. Okay. Let's move on for a second, and then if we get you back, we will continue to hear the rest of that answer, but it was great so far. At this point, I do just want to back up and say, here's some Zoom tips. I'm going to show the screen very quickly. Please, if you have questions, feel free to share them in the comment section, and we have our two co-hosts who are looking out for your questions and will help us to incorporate them as we go. So if you do have questions, you can feel free to either private chat Kirsten, she has co-host and next to her name, or you can private chat Madhu, and then they will look to incorporate them. Other than that, please stay on mute, and thank you for bearing with us. Okay. Chaka, is it possible we have you back? Doesn't seem like it. All right, let's keep going. Thank you for being a superstar, Tiana, and doing this very personal one-on-one interview. So next question for you. So we talked about how you can reduce some of that, how you can attract new people. Can you give us a little bit more specific insight into how, especially as a hiring manager, you can improve fairness and reduce bias in the hiring process?
Yeah, so as you're thinking about hiring, a lot of times people are really focused on getting the diverse slate. So I find that people are generally pretty aware about the need for that. When you're getting the diverse slate, don't forget to have a diverse interview panel as well. It's important to have that diverse perspective on both ends of the spectrum. And then as you're carrying through into the interview process and evaluating your candidates, I think, while most companies have a set of hiring criteria, what I find is that sometimes it gets a little out of the objective world into the subjective world. So sometimes as a hiring manager, I'll try to be really specific about the types of qualities that I'm looking for. And if it's not sharp enough based on the tools I get from the company, I'll sit down with my interview panelists and I'll say, these are the specific criteria that I want you to be thinking about as you're interviewing the slate. And then I'll ask them to rate each panelist objectively against that criteria and to support them with examples. So you know what that means, guys. That means they actually have to document. That means you need to write stuff down. It's not good enough to come back to me as a hiring manager if you're sitting on my panel and tell me, yeah, I kind of thought this person was that, I kind of thought that person was that. Like, I'm going to ask you that if you're going to have the privilege of sitting on my panel, that you write and you document things down, that you objectively rate things, that you capture examples. Because I think that helps you get out of some of the squishy subjective land and into more objective land. And I find that that really helps me get to the best candidate at the end of the day. So you're able to then, when you bring together everyone and have a debrief hiring decision as a team, you can talk through feedback on each candidate and really talk through either what's stellar about them or any concerns. And you can have an objective basis for evaluating candidates other than the ambiguous fit, which literally just drives me nuts, because fit to me is kind of a catch-all for how I want to exclude people when they don't fit a certain standard in my head that's non-quantifiable. So then I just say the person doesn't fit. And then finally, what I'd say is that if you're a hiring manager, you're involved in hiring processes, that I'd probably just seek to audit. If you're consistently getting an experience where I have diverse slates, but the diverse candidates are never getting chosen or very rarely getting chosen beyond the point of like statistical probability, there's probably something broken in what you're doing. So I'd probably enlist the support of HR to audit your process and see what might potentially be breaking down in here that's causing that to happen, if it's going beyond outside of the realm of statistics.
Yeah, I heard a couple of great things there between documenting what you're looking for, ensuring you have a diverse slate, ensuring you have a diverse hiring panel when you're actually interviewing. That was fantastic. Thank you. You kind of got into the question of fit and culture fit. What role, if any, should evaluating for culture fit really play into the process? And then the follow-up question after that.
I'm going to try this one more time. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. We can.
All right. My apologies. And if this keeps messing up, I'm probably just going to drop off because I feel like I'm getting in the way of a really good conversation with all of my tech difficulties. So I'm gonna try it. One more location.
This is the best one yet. So I think we got
okay.
it. So
right.
actually,
I feel like a reporter. I'm like
on the ground. Yes. The last question was, how can hiring managers improve fairness and reduce bias in the hiring process? And I know you have a lot to say about that, Chaka, because you literally wrote a book about finding the best candidate. So
yeah, so I'll say a couple things there, and then I know you wanted to also talk about fit, which I agree it can be a gatekeeper. So I mean, I think one of the things you have to do is you have to demystify bias. Bias exists in all of our minds. So people just have to understand it's how your brain works. You are automatically going to be biased towards or against certain things, and when it comes to hiring, the unfortunate thing is a lot of the beliefs that drive us are societal beliefs. So we are affected by what we think about someone because of their race or gender or sexual orientation or disability or age, etc. So those biases become unspoken criteria because we don't talk about them out loud. So you're making a decision based on some criteria, but those biases in your head and they affect the decision you're making when you're hiring. It's an unspoken criteria. So the thing is, you have to make those biases spoken. You have to figure out a way to get them out of your head. And the key there is
always happens at the best part. Okay, so
I'm so upset. That was the major key moment. I'm
right. The key there is, 2020, the things you take from us. Okay, well, as we wait for that, let's jump into the question of fit. And so my question for you, Tiana, is how should evaluating for culture fit?
He's back.
Oh, okay.
God, this is rough. Hi, yes. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes. We got to and then it cut off very dramatically.
All right, I'm gonna keep my answers very short then. There are tools you can use, like creating a bias list. A lot of them are for yourself, first of all. So write down what your biases are. So that when they come up, you're aware of them and you can try to take control of them. You don't have to share that list. If you're in an organization where you have that trust, you can start to share what your biases are. And I'm not talking about complex biases either. I'm not saying you have to write down, I have a bias against a certain gender. Literally, like I used to look at people's shoes when I was interviewing all the time. I would, for whatever reason, I noticed their shoes, and that became a part of a very early first impression. That has nothing to do with their talent. So you have to notice these things. And as you notice them, you'll start to pick up.
Apologies, I was muted. I have faith in Chaka's internet. I'm gonna give him 1 second to try to get back on, but a couple of things that I heard from what he was saying already is that you have to write down your biases no matter what they are. And the idea of trying to list them and identify them so that there's not this unwritten set of rules that's dictating who gets through the gatekeeper and who doesn't. So at least everybody involved in the decision-making process is operating from the same understanding of what is driving your decisions about who makes it and who doesn't. So moving on, because I don't see Chaka unless you are there.
Here.
Oh, yes, okay. Do you want to finish your thought and maybe cut your video so that we can get great audio from you?
Yep, just cut my video. Hopefully this helps.
Yes.
I'll just finish the thought. You got to take it out of your head and put it down on paper. So that's one thought. There are kind of more advanced things I could recommend. Like Harvard has this thing called the implicit association test. It's quite controversial. I'm not saying it's actually going to tell you what your biases are, but I recommend taking it the day before you interview as a reflection tool. It's a way for you to then identify, like, why does this test say what it says? Again, I'm not advocating it as a way to say you are going to figure out whether or not you are racist or sexist, but whatever the results are from that test, reflect on it and say what could be causing that type of thinking. It basically makes you much more mindful. So being mindful about how your brain is working is another thing that I recommend. And the implicit association test is a quick way to do that.
Thank you, that's great. So it was, first of all, be clear about your biases, write them down, take that Harvard implicit association test, and just really get clear on what's kind of blocking you from making the best decision right now. So we've touched on this in a couple of ways, but to the question of fit, and follow up to this, how can a company really screen for values? Because those are important to culture, while avoiding the traps of building a completely homogenous team or even a mostly homogenous team. Tiana, do you want to kick us off on that?
Go ahead, Chaka. What, you're working, you're functioning. Let's let you go first.
Okay, okay, and okay, good. And somebody just give me a thumbs down if you can't hear me, so I can just stop talking. So culture fit. Tiana touched on this. It is a gatekeeper, and the main thing is because most people don't define their culture. So again, what exactly is our culture if we're talking about culture fit? What are our values? You may have a mission statement, a value statement, revisit that. And is that truly your culture, or are there other things going on? So if you've got to first define your culture, otherwise it's a generic way of keeping out people that are different. And then I recommend a series of questions that you ask, because you have to ask, is this person a culture fit? I actually think you have to ask that question, because if you don't, you're going to set up people for failure. Your culture does exist. It's real. And if people can't exist within it, they are going to struggle. So if you define your culture, you do have to ask, are they a culture fit? It's hard to get around that question. But then you have to ask two more questions. You have to ask, can they adjust to our culture? Because the question of, are they a culture fit, assumes people aren't flexible. And every single one of us at some point has had to adjust to a culture. You want to ask, can they adjust? Do you see signs of this person being able to adapt? So that's really important, because not everyone's going to fit immediately. But the problem with that question, if you only ask that question, is that you are assuming they should change. And that's not necessarily a healthy thing for anyone to do. So you do want people to adjust, because we all do. But if they actually have to adjust who they are, their identity, that's unhealthy. So the third question you have to ask in this process around culture fit is, are they a culture add? can this person add to our culture? Can this thing that they bring to the table that makes us uncomfortable or nervous, or we're not sure if it's quite the right fit, does that thing actually make us stronger? You have to have a much more robust conversation about culture other than just, are they a culture fit? So ask, can they adjust? Have that conversation. And then make sure you also ask, can this person add to our culture? And that allows you to learn a lot more about your culture and a lot more about how that person can bring value to that culture. So that's my recommendation. Hopefully that went through.
Yeah, that's great. Both like recognizing that you do have a culture and the person has to fit to be successful, but then seeing the value in what they can add and bring to the table to your organization. That's really important. Tiana, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I do struggle with this area a little bit, as I mentioned, because I think fit is kind of a catch-all term that's really, despite the meaning fit is used to actually exclude versus include. It subjectively includes the people we want and subjectively excludes the people we don't want. I do agree with the point on values. The ad I'd have is, and the connection with the point on culture is that sometimes you have articulated values. Most companies have an articulated set of values. So an employee can kind of assess, and you can kind of assess, do they fit with your articulated values? What I'd say is that what you articulate can sometimes be aspirational and or different than what your actual culture is. And so I think having a level of self-awareness on, is there a disconnect between what you're saying your values are and what your actual behaviors are manifesting in terms of your culture is helpful in that process. But I really, in my opinion, I think on this piece, it's really less about you as a hiring manager and more about the person in that sense. Like, so I would kind of flip my answer to the other person and saying, and I totally agree that if I feel like I can't be my best self coming to this organization, I shouldn't be there. If I can't bring everything that I am and everything that I have there, it's not the right place for me. But frankly, it's not, you don't want them as an employer there either. Because if they're not bringing the best of everything they have, you're not getting the best return on that investment. And so I think that, but again, as an employer, like, you kind of have to check your, and as an organization, you kind of have to assess your spirit to say, am I truly willing to embrace people's differences or not? Am I truly willing to embrace cultures that are different than my own or not? And I would say that probably the answer more often than not is no. Just to be honest, and as a person who's been often excluded, I would say definitely I feel that. So I guess flipping it back to an individual perspective, the way that I've navigated that as an individual is to try to align myself with people and or parts of the organization that embrace things that I personally value and or environments where I personally thrive. And that's how I've survived my career. Against the grain of being in a corporate environment that generally is not designed for me to thrive or be successful.
Oh, someone's unmuted. Would you mind going back on mute? Thank you, Tiana. That was great. So you talked about a couple of things that were great there. So both like realizing that you've been on the receiving end of not being the culture fit and how that can really be, destructive to an inclusive environment, and aligning yourself with people whose values you relate to and whose values frankly align with the company's values that are stated but not always lived. That was very important. Thank you. So this is the recent Alumni Ambassadors Association, and not all of us are hiring managers quite yet. And so say you're not a hiring manager and you're not in HR, what can you do to create a more inclusive and equitable workplace as an individual contributor? Chaka, are you there? Would you like
Yep.
to
I'll toss out a couple ideas. So one, and again, this depends on like what you're able to do. But I've found in a lot of organizations creating kind of like book clubs with authors that represent a range of identities has been something that's been effective because it allows people to discuss issues that they normally may not discuss. And quite often people have the ability to create something like that, whether it's a book club or not, or readings, or creating groups where people can read things around these issues that allows people to talk about their identity, but it's focused on a reading versus the individual, because what you're not trying to do is put the weight on like, hey, tell me about what it's like to be, have a disability or be Black or etc. So if you can organize those kinds of things, that's really helpful. As an individual, if you are able to bring voices into the room when they're not there, that is really valuable, because what happens in environments is I may not be in the room to tell you what this perspective feels like for a Black male. And if you are someone who can say, hey, have we thought about this perspective? Or have we talked to Chaka? So quite often decisions get made in rooms where we are not, whoever it is that's kind of excluded. So as an everyday person, reminding people of that perspective is something you can do. And again, all of this depends on the culture that you're operating in and whether or not it's possible. The other thing you can do is you can try, if you're trying to shift your organization, is you can try to go back to their diversity statement or their mission statement or whatever it is in your organization and actually look at that and see what are the actions that correlate with whatever they say matters to them, and then try to highlight those actions, try to live those actions. So in that way, you're not coming at this where it seems like you're coming from, people don't know where you're coming from. Like, why does this matter to you? Well, it matters to you because we as an organization say this is one of our core values, or this is in our diversity statement, and therefore here's an action that we could take. So somehow trying to bridge that gap between what your organization says it means and stands for and what you're actually doing. Because a lot of times people worry about kind of putting their foot forward and being questioned or criticized, or people not understanding it. So being prepared to kind of explain why you're taking a particular stance or position and tying it back to what supposedly should be common is an approach that you can take.
Yeah, Ashley, I'm so glad you asked this question because I'm really passionate about it. To achieve real equity, every person in your organization must see D&I as their job, okay? If we relegate the job of D&I to HR, it's doomed. It's dead. Because then it becomes the job of HR to police, is D&I happening or not, rather than it becoming embedded in the DNA of your organization because everybody is living and breathing it. So I think that's the fundamental starting point for how I view that. I think the other piece, that D&I behaviors and outputs also have to be valued and rewarded, and ideally they're required and measured for every employee, just like any other strategic imperative in the company. So, but obviously, none of you are maybe like the chief HR officer at your company, unless maybe I missed someone's title. Maybe you are. Then this is for you. But if that's not you, then how do you think about bringing that into your work? Most people do annual objective setting of some sort at work. How can you personally think about, within the context of your objectives, how you might bring D&I forward in your organization? Now, I will tell you, most companies, almost every single company, has made some kind of statement, whether it was external to your employees, they posted some kind of black box on social media saying they care about social or racial justice, or equality, or commitment to valuing all employees. So I'm pretty sure you can find that in your corporate content somewhere, that's a stated core value of your company. I would almost like bet a percentage in my paycheck that's true for every single one of you. And so go pull that and then think about, overlay that with what you're doing and say, how can I bring something forward in what I'm doing to advance the agenda against what the company's saying it wants to do? And then write that in your objectives and get alignment through your leadership that you're going to work on that. Whether that's working for ERG, maybe you're a young professional And so there's a young professionals group. Or maybe you want to be an ally for the LGBTQ group. Or maybe you want to be in the working moms group, or whatever it is that you want to do, go do that and make it part of it. That's organizationally. Now, I want you to also think about how you can bring it to your everyday work. I'm a marketer. So as a marketer, D&I can come to life in many ways. It's thinking about the things you already do and applying a broader, more diverse lens to it. So, for example, as a marketer, I choose to intentionally infuse thinking about underrepresented consumer targets in advertising and product development. Now, advertising and product development is part of what I do. I'm just thinking about audiences in a different way, but it's just the regular work that I'm doing and thinking about expanding my table. I'm thinking about audiences in a different way. Or the diverse partners that I leverage to execute my work. So when I'm picking a vendor or a supplier, it's like, hey, do I have a chance to maybe bring an all women minority vendor that can execute this same task that someone else could, that sort of thing, if that's within my scope. Or it could be things like how I allocate my media or budget spend among key consumer groups, so things like that. And I'm sure whatever your given function is, if you work in engineering, it could be how you source ingredients. Or, if you work in insights, it could be, thinking about who you target, or how you do segmentation, or what vendors you partner with to crunch your numbers, or whatever it is. Try to apply the same lens to whatever you do and say, how could I be more inclusive in my thinking? It can apply to whatever you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. There were so many great points here, so I'm just going to recap because I've been taking notes too for myself, but also for this. So I heard a couple of things that were fantastic. One, think about starting a book club within your organization so that people can learn without burdening their minority or underrepresented colleagues. Bring in outside diverse voices so that people can learn from others, again, and think about where others are maybe not participating currently in the work environment. Bridging that gap between the values and reality and being prepared to talk about that. Also, you mentioned, Tiana, that the D&I behaviors need to be valued and they need to be measured as part of the strategic imperative. Placing some of those goals that your company stated, whether officially or even on their social media, into your quarterly goals, into your biannual goals, and thinking about ways that you can work toward them. And then looking at who you target and who you invest in, and thinking about minority-owned vendors, thinking about balancing your budget spend so that you are reaching out to underrepresented or diverse groups so that all voices are effectively being invested in and reached out to. So that was great stuff. Thank you. So we're going to ask one more question, and then we're going to go into breakout discussions. Then we have some questions for you all so you can talk to each other and kind of figure out how you're going to internalize this and take some positive next steps. So if you were thinking about leaving, don't, but instead maybe use this time to grab your coffee, do what you need to do because we need you back in full mode for our discussion and breakouts. But one question I don't think you're going to miss is you're going to want to miss is that the concept of being an ally has become very, very popular now. But in your own experiences, Tiana and then Chaka, what has true allyship really looked like?
Oh yes, I'm very concerned about the way that we're looking at and approaching and defining allyship right now, because I feel it highly predisposes performative outcomes. We're positioning allyship as a badge to be worn rather than what it should be, which is fighting for what's right. So it's not really surprising to me, and I'm not sure if you guys saw this, but there was a study that came out recently, and it said, it found that 80% of white employees view themselves as allies to women of color. How many Black women viewed themselves, reported having white allies at work? 10%. How many Latinas viewed themselves as having white allies at work? 19%. I want you to think about those numbers. 80% versus 10, 80% versus 19. Okay, so of 8 people, 1 of them was an ally. Out of 8 people, 2 were Latina. Just let that sink in for a minute. That's a very big disconnect. Real allyship requires sacrifice, and it yields tangible outcomes in the forms of things like money, time, reputation, promotions, sometimes, frankly, often at your expense if you're an ally. Allyship is an action, it's not a title.
I love that. Allyship is an action, not a title, and often one given by the person in the underrepresented group and not by the person themselves. Chaka, do you have anything you'd like to add to that? I'm going to ask to unmute you because I think you're on mute. You going to try one more time?
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'll say quickly, it's hard to fight for someone, help someone, create change for someone if you don't really know them. And I find a lot of allies don't really know the people that they're allies for. They have, so the best way you can do that is get to know people, proximity, get closer to people, make sure you're listening to what they're saying, make sure you acknowledge and say, you know what, you might be right, or I have to really rethink what how I'm thinking about this, asking questions, what can I do different? But I'd go back to that concept of proximity, and that will help you really understand what is it that I need to do. I think Tiana made some great points, so that's kind of what I would add. That allows you to actually be an ally versus believe that you're an ally.
We got a question for the audience, and I'm going to direct it to Tiana, but the question is, when hiring people who are more of a culture add, are there any approaches to working with your team or your company to see the value in that change that they're bringing, or how do you manage the initial discomfort of taking in a person who is different from the culture today? So Tiana, would love your thoughts on that.
Yes, I think in order to make sure that person's not rejected by the organization, you have to put a structure around them to ensure that they're successful. So I think that looks like above to this side and below, meaning that they have to have sponsorship at leadership level, meaning they need to have peer support in the form of buddies, and meaning they've got to have a good, strong team underneath them. And I think that will hopefully help minimize. I mean, I think it probably will be painful for that person to be coming into another culture, because there's always that feeling of like jumping in a cold pool if you're at room temperature. But I think that having that support structure around will help ease that person into the culture, hopefully be better accepted by the culture, and choosing the right people to play those roles will also help introduce them into the culture and help them gain acceptance into the culture.
That's great, thank you. So we are about at time. I'd love to just hear any closing thoughts you have for us, Tiana, any words of wisdom. You've shared so many, but any last thoughts you'd like to leave us with?
Just that, diversity and inclusion, it's intentional. It doesn't happen by accident. The great thing is, all of you made a choice to call in today and be a part of this. So obviously you care. You have the power to decide every day, every interaction, every moment to be an advocate for equality.
Yes, I love that you framed it as a decision, because it is, and often not an easy one. And Chaka, it looks like we have you back. We're doing closing thoughts. Any final words you'd like to leave the group with today?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. I mean, the thing I'd say is exclusion is a universal experience. Everyone feels it. All of us have felt excluded at some time. And you may even hear that as an argument against like DEI, because like, oh, well, I mean, it's not like I had it easy, right? But there are those of us who feel excluded even more and feel it more viscerally, and it affects us in a different way. The thing I'd say to our audience here today, everyone on this phone, is that all of us, every single one of us, is going to increasingly feel the effects of exclusion. And not just because of what's going on in the world. I'm actually talking about every single one of us on this call is going to get old. We're going to age. And I've been reading a lot about ageism and also issues around disabilities. Along with age comes disability. Every single one of us is going to feel that in the future. You're going to feel what it feels like for a world not to be built for you. And my suggestion is get ahead of that. So if you're not, if the message around DEI, around race or gender doesn't work for you or doesn't work for people around you, just realize that in the future, those same things, those types of things are going to affect you. So having a deeper understanding of diversity, equity, inclusion, and how it affects others now is only going to benefit you in the long run. So it's almost a very self-centered approach, a different way of looking at it, because being able-bodied right now, being young, all those things will shift, and you'll find in the future that unless you create a better world for everyone, all of us are going to increasingly struggle. So there's something there in the reading that I've been doing around ageism and being able-bodied or not that is interesting to me, and I recommend people kind of think through it from that lens. That's my kind of my final thoughts on it.
It's very powerful. We will all be affected by that sense of exclusion someday unless we create a better world. So we are at time. On behalf of the Stanford GSB Recent Alumni Association, we thank you so much for coming today. We will have, we'll be sending you both a recording of this conference. You can listen to the call and get some more tidbits. I'm sure when you listen the second time, you'll take even more away. And we will also be sending you a follow-up survey to understand how you experienced things today and what worked and what didn't work. So with that, I will close. We'll have some goodness in there, some links to a couple of resources, including Chaka's books. So thank you so much for joining today. And we are so excited to see what you do as you become a better diversity, equity, and inclusion advocate. So have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.